chief. Unli apne sakya elana picha. Chief changes anu. Changes tamba. Changes tana. Akaka. Yatiya masifisa.
Welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving into a topic that challenges the narratives many of us were taught about American Indian history, the Yamassee people. And how do they connect to the Seminole and Creek nations? For centuries, the Yamassee has been described as a people of dark complexion, even identified as Negroes in some historical accounts. Yet their story often gets overshadowed, or worse, misrepresented. In this video, we're going to break it all down. We'll explore the connections between the Yamassee, the Seminole, and the Creek, and ask some critical questions. If the Seminole and Creek claim ties to the Yamassee, where is the Yamassee today? And more importantly, where do the dark-complexioned people, historically identified as Yamassee, fit into these narratives? Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll understand not just the historical complexities, but also the undeniable truth. The Yamassee people are still here, and their story is far from over. Let's get into it.
But before we embark, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated with our historical explorations.
Okay, and that was my next question, Chief Seco, was that what's the relationship between the Yamassee and the Black Seminole? But in a sense, you're saying that there is a very tight relationship. That
Yes.
It's just a continuation.
Yes, that's right, and exactly. Even when you look at the name or the tribe now in Miami, Miccosukee, when you look at the actual derivative of it was actually Miccosukee, which is our name for chief in Hitchiti. The Miccosukee speaks a very close derivative of the Yamasic language that they called Hitchiti. So that's the tie-in, and you'll see that within their historical documents if you go down and visit the Seminole Reservation, and you'll see the pictures of the old or black Seminoles. Predominantly all the pictures there are of black or dark-skinned Seminole women or Miccosukee women. If you look up the historical archive with Billy Bowlegs and the rest of those, you see that they were pretty dark. You know, they were black if you would consider them such, based on what their ancestors look like today. So.
To truly understand the identity of the Yamassee people, it's important to look at historical records that describe them. In the book Sketch of the Seminole War and Sketches During a Campaign by a lieutenant of the left wing, some fascinating observations are made on pages 25 and 26, where it states, "One cannot help being struck with the remarkable coincidence in some respects between the present Seminole War in Florida with that which occurred in Carolina with the Yamassees 120 years ago. East Florida was the original possession of the ancient Yamassees, who also owned a portion of Carolina, and the fierce and warlike spirit of that powerful tribe seems to have sprung up from their graves to animate the souls of their conquerors. Some few drops of their blood yet exist in the veins of the Seminoles, and the language of the latter has borrowed many of their words. In both instances, the name Seminole means wanderers or wild people. They emigrated from the main body of the Creeks about 100 years. It is worthy of remark as to this term by which the Seminoles designate themselves, that at the present day they contradistinguish the Creeks by the appellation Talofoka, people living in towns or having an established home. Tolofa means town, and Oka, a tribe. It is probable, he imagines, that this fable took its rise from a fugitive remnant of the Yamassees, who found a refuge in this swamp, and were perhaps, after a lapse of time, accidentally seen by some of the hunters of the Creek Nation. Simmons, in his note of Florida, says, "The SvnoyiWahya tribe of Seminoles are thought to be descendants of the Yamassees, as they are blacker than the other tribes, and the Yamassees are said to have been remarkably dark-complexioned. King Payne, the grandfather of Miccosukee, the present governor, married his Yamassee slave, and his son Chief Payne, uncle to Miccosukee, bore strong marks of his dark descent." Before continuing, I believe it important to further explain this section. As it mentioned before, the Seminole emigrated from the main body of the Creeks about 100 years, demonstrating that the Creek and Seminoles share the same origins and are closely connected, while also mentioning that East Florida was the original possession of the ancient Yamassees, who also owned a portion of Carolina. some few drops of their blood yet exist in the veins of the Seminoles. The mentioning of the ancient Yamassees illustrates that the Yamassee is the eldest of the three tribes, and both the Creek and the Seminole derive from the ancient Yamassee. This section of passage highlights how the Seminoles, as a distinct group, differentiated themselves from the Creeks through terminology that reflects differences in their lifestyles or social organization. The term Talof Ulka. The Seminoles use the term Talof Ulka to describe the Creeks. Talof translates to town. Ulke translates to tribe. Together, Talof Ulka means people living in towns or a tribe with an established home. Contradistinguish. This phrase means that the Seminoles use this term to draw a contrast or distinction between themselves and the Creeks. By calling the Creeks Talof Ulka, the Seminoles are emphasizing that the Creeks were primarily town-dwelling people with settled communities, possibly to highlight a difference in how they perceive themselves compared to the Creeks. Cultural and historical implications. The Seminoles originated from Creek groups that migrated to Florida and became culturally distinct over time. This included adopting new ways of life, influenced by the environment and interactions with other groups. By referring to the Creeks as Talof Ulka, the Seminoles may have been subtly implying that the Creeks were more sedentary and attached to specific towns, while the Seminoles saw themselves as different, potentially more mobile, independent, or less tied to a particular location. This distinction might also reflect the historical and cultural divergence that occurred as the Seminoles established their own identity in Florida. Why it's worthy of remark. The use of such terminology reveals how native groups developed nuanced identities and how they perceived and described one another. It underscores the importance of names and labels in reflecting broader social, cultural, or lifestyle differences, even among closely related groups. This observation by the author helps shed light on the evolving relationship between the Seminoles and Creeks, showing how language can encapsulate a group's sense of self and their view of others. In essence, the Seminoles' use of Talof Ulka for the Creeks highlights their self-perception as distinct from their Creek ancestors, emphasizing a cultural and possibly geographic divergence that shaped their identity as a unique tribe. To continue, the author notes the remarkable coincidence between the Yamassee and Seminole, describing how East Florida was once the possession of the Yamassee. Even more importantly, it states that the fierce and warlike spirit of the Yamassee seems to live on through the Seminole. But here's the key detail. The text mentions that some few drops of their blood yet exist in the veins of the Seminoles. This acknowledgement of shared lineage opens up an important discussion. The book goes further, explicitly stating that the Yamassee were remarkably dark-complexioned. It also points to accounts of the SvnoyiWahya tribe of Seminoles being descendants of the Yamassee, emphasizing that they were blacker than the other tribes. This depiction challenges common narratives and sheds light on a significant aspect of their identity that is often overlooked. Additionally, the text reveals the connection between the Yamassee and figures like King Payne and Chief Payne, who bore strong marks of his dark descent. These details paint a picture of a people who were not only influential, but also distinct in their physical appearance, marking their presence in history in a way that cannot be ignored. This historical evidence raises critical questions about the portrayal of Native American tribes and the erasure of darker complexioned groups like the Yamassee. It also challenges modern perceptions, pushing us to ask, if the Seminole and Creek nations claim ties to the Yamassee, where are the Yamassee people today, and what does this mean for their descendants who still carry this legacy?
Muskogee were people who, can you talk a little bit about that history, because they were people who were very prominent in what's now the eastern part of the United States?
Well, yes, before actually the Creek word came into existence, which was created, there was Muskukali or Muskogee, as you may have heard. Outside of that, it was Wali. My particular tribe was Yamassee. Yamassee was considered and is considered in the Industrial Commission, which is a congressional set, as being described factually as, for lack of a better word, African or Negro. We were one of the only tribes that were labeled that way, but were a part of the Muskogee Confederacy. History has proven, though, that we had a very large empire ourselves, being the only tribe that had upper and lower Yamassee. And within that, a lot of tribes you might have heard were a part of that confederation called Muskogee, which was actually Yamassee, which is the Hitchiti, the Appalachee, the Oconee, the Salkehatchee, those different tribes, the Hupspa, all those were different villages and tribes under, quote, the Muskogee bloodline, but were actually Yamassee people and citizens or tribal members.
I see.
Now, let's take a look at the book, The Invention of the Creek Nation, 1670 to 1763, by Stephen C. Hahn, on page 14, where it states, warming, known as the medieval optimum, 900, 1350 AD that led to longer growing seasons and greater agricultural productivity. Mississippian cultures appear to have evolved first in the Mississippi River Basin, most likely at the well-known site of Cahokia, Illinois. Over several centuries, Mississippian culture then spread to other areas of the American South, as evidenced by the region-wide proliferation of certain symbolic artistic motifs and a regional dependency on the culture's staple crop, corn. An important point to emphasize is that many of the tribal confederacies of the post-invasion period, the Creeks, Cherokees, Chickasaws, and Choctaws, for example, did not yet exist in a form recognizable to people of the late 17th and 18th centuries. Mississippian societies instead are best thought of as a series of regionally circumscribed and politically and socially stratified polities called chiefdoms by most anthropologists. Mississippian chiefdoms, however, came in a variety of sizes and types, making it difficult to characterize any one form as typical. On one end of the spectrum, the great chiefdom that emerged at Cahokia, Illinois, appears to have been home to more than 20,000 souls, and its chief may have held sway over a territory beyond the confines of Cahokia itself. On the other end of the spectrum, groups such as the Florida Timucuans organized themselves into much smaller chiefdoms of a few thousand at most, and adopted Mississippian cultural motifs only selectively. If we were forced to draw a composite sketch of the average southeastern chiefdom, however, suffice it to say that most chiefdoms were multi-community polities, typically consisting of clusters of 8 towns located on the margins of a river or large creek. Each town probably held no more than 100 individual habitations, and the population of the chiefdom as a whole rarely, if ever, exceeded 5,000 persons. The maximum radius of these chiefdoms appears to have been 12½ miles, a size that is thought to have facilitated the cohesiveness of the chiefdom. A chief, it has been argued, could have walked the length of such a polity in a single day, thereby enabling him to maintain face-to-face contact with his people. Documentary and archaeological evidence clearly suggests that the early chiefdoms were hierarchical societies. At the top of the hierarchical political structure was the chief, who ruled over his own village and the outlying villages that comprised his chiefdom. Now, let's take a moment to explain and dive into the origins of the Mississippian cultures and how they laid the groundwork for many of the tribal nations we know today, such as the Creeks, Seminoles, Choctaws, and Cherokees. Between 900 and 1350 AD, during a period known as the medieval optimum, warmer climates created longer growing seasons. This led to agricultural advancements, especially in the cultivation of corn, which became a staple crop for many societies. One of the most significant centers of this cultural evolution was Cahokia, located in present-day Illinois. Cahokia wasn't just a city, it was a thriving hub of Mississippian culture, home to over 20,000 Indians. The chief of Cahokia likely held power over territories far beyond the city itself, making it a political and cultural superpower of its time. Over the centuries, this Mississippian culture spread across the southeastern United States. Communities began adopting its artistic styles, agricultural practices, and social structures. However, not all Mississippian societies were the same. For example, the Timucuans in Florida organized themselves into smaller chiefdoms, adopting Mississippian traits more selectively. Now let's talk about what these chiefdoms looked like. A typical Mississippian chiefdom was a group of 8 or so towns clustered along rivers or large creeks. Each town had no more than about 100 individual houses, and the total population of a chiefdom rarely exceeded 5,000 people. These chiefdoms were small, but they were tightly organized. They spanned an area of about 12.5 miles, allowing chiefs to walk across their entire territory in a single day. This face-to-face interaction helped chiefs maintain control and foster unity among their people. At the top of the social hierarchy was the chief, who ruled over both his village and the surrounding towns in the chiefdom. These societies were highly organized, with clear social and political structures. But here's where it gets interesting. The tribal confederacies we know today, like the Creeks, Cherokees, Choctaws, and Chickasaws, didn't exist in the form we recognize until much later. These modern tribes emerged after European contact during the colonial era. They were likely formed as smaller Mississippian chiefdoms consolidated in response to external pressures like European colonization, diseases, and forced migrations. This means that the Creeks and Seminoles, for example, didn't begin as distinct tribes but evolved from smaller Mississippian chiefdoms. The political and cultural foundations of these chiefdoms, centered on agriculture, community organization, and regional trade, paved the way for the tribal nations that later became dominant in the Southeast. So, the next time you hear about the Creek Nation or the Seminoles, remember that their roots lie in these early Mississippian chiefdoms which were known as the Yamassee Indians. The small, tightly knit communities of the Yamassee Mississippian era set the stage for the rich and complex tribal identities that would emerge centuries later. The story of the Mississippian cultures and their chiefdoms reminds us of the deep roots and resilience of the native peoples of the Southeast. From the thriving city of Cahokia to the small river-based chiefdoms, these Yamassee societies laid the foundation for the great tribal nations we recognize today, like the Creeks, Seminoles, and Choctaws. Their legacy is one of adaptability, strength, and cultural evolution in the face of changing times. Understanding this history helps us appreciate the interconnectedness of these nations and the incredible depth of their heritage. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content exploring the stories of indigenous peoples and their enduring legacies. Thanks for watching. If you would like to express your encouragement towards these works and content, please go to paypal.me/SvnoyiWahya, or you can even directly contribute through Cashapp at $SvnoyiWahya. Any amount you give will be immensely appreciated. Thank you for your generosity.